Welcome everyone again to another CommandZone.com deck tech. Today we're going to talk about Borborygmos the Enraged. I like Borborygmos as a general. He does cost quite a bit, which is one of his downsides, but he's got a very stout body. He's a 7/6 trampler, and whenever he attacks and deals damage to a player, you can mill 3 cards. All those land cards will come to your hand, the rest in your graveyard, and he can also throw lands at players and creatures. Now, the way I built this deck, I made it to be a graveyard combo deck, and I decided not to run a lot of creatures. In my research for this deck, I was looking at other builds online, and I found that I really just didn't care for the creature-heavy Borborygmos decks. That I wanted to really do like a lands type of build where I had quite a mass of lands and spells to ramp me up and eventually lead to some turn where I can kill multiple opponents in one turn. So anyway, this deck does very well against non-interactive decks that are also trying to combo off, that really don't care to interact with our general. And I think it does fairly poorly against combo decks that have well-placed counterspells, because what you really want to do is land one of our big heavy hitters, which will allow us to really go off and win the game. It does very well against creature decks. However, those with a lot of targeted spot removal, it doesn't do very well simply because of his high mana cost. And if you get to turn 5 or turn 6 and you end up casting him and they kill him, it really sets you back quite a bit. So anyway, let's take a look at the deck, and we'll start with the lands. Alright, so let's get started here with the basic lands. Now, in total, there are 42 lands in this deck, which may seem like quite a bit, but we do need them for this general. So anyway, we have 8 basic forests and 15 basic mountains. Now, normally people would ask, why would you put more mountains and forest? Well, in this deck, not only can you use the graveyard to win, but you can Vesuva a Valakut or Thespian Sage Valakut, and you can win in that manner with Escape Shift. So it is very important to have some critical mass of mountains for the deck to function properly. Okay, so moving on to the non-basics, we have on the top left the Valakut, which is one of our alternate win conditions. If you would like to escape shift into a Valakut or Valakut and Vesuva, you can do that in this deck. One of the most important lands, actually, outside of Valakut is the Glacial Chasm. And Glacial Chasm says when it comes into play, you sacrifice a land, and it has a cumulative upkeep of pay 2 life. So it is quite taxing. However, what it does is it reduces all damage to you to 0. Alright, so what it does for our deck is it allows us to set up our combo, take no damage from creature decks, and set up a win where we can just finish off multiple opponents at the same time. Outside of the Glacial Chasm, we have Strip Mine and Wasteland, which works very well with our Oracle and Azusa and Crucible combo. As well as just Yavimaya Hollows and basic utility lands that come stock in every red-green deck. Now again, I'd like to just say real quick that I'm not running many fetch lands simply because we do need this critical mass of mountains to make our Valakut work, and if we were to run more fetch lands, it would take away from our basic land count, so we couldn't have that happen in this deck. Okay, so let's take a look at our mana rocks in this deck. Now, really, this is one of the EDH decks where you want quite a mass of artifact mana ramp. More so than I think other decks, because your spells do cost quite a bit, especially your general. And our deck is missing Thran Dynamo. I think that is actually one oversight of the deck, and if you're looking to build this, you should probably have that in there. Otherwise, it's a fairly stock list for mana rocks of any green-red ramp deck. Looking at the creatures real quick, we have Oracle of Moldiah and Azusa Lost But Seeking. Both these are used just to ramp us out and to get a little more value out of our lands in the deck because we do run so many of them. Next is Eternal Witness. This is the most efficient green creature in all of Magic, so I decided to include her. Wart Raid Mother is very unique card in that it allows you to copy all of your instants and sorceries, and because we do have quite a few powerful instants and sorceries, I decided that this card would be good for the deck. The last and most interesting card, which you don't really see too much of, is Gamekeeper. And Gamekeeper is very interesting because it allows us to basically put most of our graveyard or most of our library into our graveyard, which gets value from our combo pieces like Creeping Renaissance and Life from the Loam, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Next are the 5 enchantments in the deck, 4 of which are dedicated strictly to mana advantage. The worst of the four, I would say, is Gaia's Touch, simply because it requires basic force to be used, and we only have 8 of them in the deck. The next is Sylvan Library. Green and red together are notorious for a lack of card advantage, so Sylvan Library allows us to have a little bit of card advantage when we need it. So here we have the non-mana rock artifacts in the deck. You can see on the top left we can start with Bladed Bracers, which allows Borborygmos to throw 6 damage lands from hand. Crucible, as we talked about earlier. Grafted Exoskeleton, which works extremely well with Borborygmos. If you're able to equip him and he is not destroyed immediately, you can throw just 4 lands and kill each opponent by giving them 12 poison, or 3 lands with a Bladed Bracers as well attached. We have Horn of Greed, simply because we are going to be playing more than 1 land each turn, and therefore we will get more advantage than our opponents, as we will draw for many of those lands. We have Memory Jar, and probably the coolest artifact in the entire deck, which is Storm Cauldron. Storm Cauldron is a house. Storm Cauldron says each opponent can play 1 additional land each turn. However, whenever they tap that land for mana, it goes back to their hand. So basically, you know, your opponents will scoop to you if you play a Storm Cauldron on turn 3 or turn 4. A lot of the time, they just can't stand the advantage that, you know, you're going to be able to get out of it. Especially with Borborygmos, you can, you know, tap all your lands, bring them back to your hand. You can throw them all at your opponents. You can put them in your graveyard. You can Creeping Renaissance them back. You can do it over and over again, and it's very difficult for your opponents to handle. They'll be stuck on 3 or 4 land for the entire game, which makes Storm Cauldron probably the most, or one of the most powerful cards in the entire deck. Zoran Orb as a combo piece with Creeping Renaissance. You can name lands, and then, you know, with it on the stack, you can sacrifice all of your lands, bring them back to your hand, and then toss them with a Borborygmos. And the last one, Swiftfoot Boots, to give your general haste and to keep him out of harm's way. Next on the list are our red instants and sorceries. We have quite a few copy effects in this deck, so we have Reverberate, Fork, and Increasing Vengeance to copy a lot of our instants and sorceries. And 2 of our more powerful spells are Destructive Force and Wildfire up on the top. Now, these spells are very annoying for your opponents because you can generally cast them on turn 4 or 5, which would wrath everyone's boards and leave you with some mana rocks in play, and possibly an exploration or something like that to recover faster than your opponents. A lot of my opponents have scooped from these things, but I think they're very good for the deck, simply because red and green don't have, you know, a lot of the powerful spells that blue and black have. So you're really fighting an uphill battle against some of the more powerful decks in the format. Other than that, we have Past in Flames, really to gain a lot of advantage from our graveyard. We have Wheel of Fortune, because that type of effect is very powerful in this deck, and we also have a Gamble, which is one of the only tutor type effects that we can get from red and green, which will get, you know, any card in our deck. Last but not least are the green instants and sorceries. Most of these I would think are pretty stock for any green EDH deck. We do have a couple interesting ones like Boundless Realms. Now simply we can take advantage of this because of the amount of land that we run. Praetor's Council is another big one, as well as Creeping Renaissance, Life from the Loam, and Scapeshift, which you wouldn't really find in most decks. However, I think you can understand why we would play something like Creeping Renaissance, which would really just kill multiple 2 or 3 opponents in a single turn with a Borborygmos out. Now, one of the cards that I really don't like in the deck is Seek the Horizon. I think it's a little underwhelming, and possibly, or you know what, there are many cards that we could swap out for this one. Maybe even a Thran Dynamo could be a little bit better. So that's really the deck. If you are really, really perceptive, you've counted all the cards and you've seen that there are 100 cards in the deck, and I did that accidentally. I thought I was missing a card, so I added the Gauntlet of Might. But it should be gone from the deck to have 99, if you're worried about that. And lastly, if you're interested in cards, I sell quite a few cards on eBay. My eBay name is TheCommandZone MTG. You could find me on eBay. I sell a lot of Magic cards, most of them foreign, Japanese, and foil. If you're into that stuff, check me out. I have really good prices, best on eBay. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Get to TheCommandZone.com for a full deck list of Borborygmos Enraged, and check us out for more deck techs. Thank you.